There is a bear in the woods. For some people, the bear is easy to see. Others don't see it at all. Some people say the bear is tame. Others say it's vicious and dangerous. Since no one can really be sure who's right, isn't it smart to be as strong as the bear? If there is a bear.
Political ads are famously weird and dumb. I started outlining this video essay, got it to a respectable length, then thought I should probably include an in-depth debunk of at least one specific anti-Warnock ad from the Loeffler campaign. I guess I picked a good one because by the time I got through a single ad, I had an unwieldy 4,000 plus word outline with everything else I'd already written. With the extremely crucial Georgia runoffs a mere 4 or 5 days away, depending on when I get this out, I thought my specific debunk was more important to get out ASAP. So, for my leftist, liberal, and even some right-leaning friends, Republicans have done nothing but obstruct government action, not counting the destruction they've wrought on this planet in my living memory, and having Democrats in charge of all 3 branches of the federal government is the only way we're going to have a chance of getting literally anything done in the near future. Democrats suck, but at least they might respond to public pressure. And there are a few good people in the party. Yes, electoral politics are not going to get us anywhere close to the change we actually need, but this is the best I can do at the moment. Please share this video, subscribe, like, comment, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch at Haas_Bossman. Listen to Breadsheet, be nice to me and each other, and here we go. Political advertising has a long, proud history of engaging in bombastic, on-the-nose pandering. I found a great archive of U.S. presidential television ads at livingroomcandidate.org, dating all the way back to the 1952 election, so that's where I got all these older clips and excerpts and B-roll, including the bizarre Reagan bear ad this video opened with. But I didn't find a good archive of ads for smaller-scale candidates. I'm sure those get a lot weirder. Definitely bookmarking this Living Room Candidate site for a future deep dive on how presidential political ads have changed over the past 70 years, but that's going to have to be a protracted project. Let me know in the comments if that's something that might interest you. Today, I just want to talk real quick about these Georgia Synod ads we've been seeing down here in the stanky South. As should surprise no one who's seen any clips of the infamous Kelly Loeffler versus Raphael Warnock debate, the Republicans' predetermined talking points about Reverend Warnock are that he's a radical, dangerous liberal. Loeffler refused to address Warnock by his actual title throughout that debate, referring to him exclusively as
Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock.
My opponent, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock. My opponent, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock. My opponent, Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock. Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock, 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 Radical Liberal Raphael Warnock.
13 times in total, I believe. Clearly, this is what she was told to do before the debate. I mean, besides being extremely disrespectful and just plain rude, this display was painfully transparent and clunky. Loeffler is a charisma black hole, and she failed miserably at weaving this talking point into her rhetoric in anything resembling an organic way.
That's why I'm fighting to make sure that the Republican majority is retained in the Senate, because we are the shock absorber for common sense policies that bring Americans together, that lift everyone up, that provides for great educational choices for kids, that stops the radical agenda of the abortion on demand that Democrats want, that attacks our Second Amendment rights. They want to take away our guns. They want to tax guns.
Similarly, her ads and TV appearances repeat words like radical and dangerous and extreme and Marxist to the point of nearly rendering those adjectives meaningless. Her campaign even appears to have bought the domain radicalraphael.com, a website chock full of lies and misrepresentations of Reverend Warnock, a center-left Democrat whose policies are mostly slightly to the right of the majority of American liberals. I decided to make this video when I was subjected to one of the most over-the-top political ads I've ever seen. Sadly, despite searching extensively and being annoyingly vigilant about trying to capture all the political ads I've seen since, I haven't been able to find this original ad as of this recording. In the roughly 5-second ad, Warnock is shown preaching fervently through a reddish and grayish filter, very Zack Snyder DC movie third act stuff, saying something that I'm sure sounds scary to some people when seen and heard out of context. The gravelly voiceover then says, "Raphael Warnock, too radical, too dangerous." The subtext is pretty clear. He may be a deeply religious Christian, because he's a pastor, but he's one of those weird, scary pastors. The pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which happens to be Martin Luther King Jr.'s old church. The pastor at a church that's strange and different, that dares talk about how poverty and racism are bad. And also other reasons, like the type of person who tends to make up the church's congregation, maybe? This type of framing ought to be familiar to anyone who is a coherent human being during Obama's 2008 bid for the presidency. That election cycle saw the ad nauseum repetition of a clip of Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the pastor of a church Barack Obama had been known to frequent or at least attend more than once, saying, "God damn America," during a sermon he was giving about American foreign policy, apparently.
He doesn't want you to hear this.
Not God bless America, God America.
Now, I thought this was pretty badass at the time, as I still do today, but sadly my sentiment isn't shared by a lot of Americans. Most are unfortunately indoctrinated to think that American foreign policy at least has good intentions behind it, but that's an argument for another day. The bottom line is that Obama's association with Reverend Wright seemed like it was going to be a pretty harmful thing to his campaign, but it obviously didn't do what the Republicans wanted it to, as in Obama still became president twice. I'm mostly going to focus on the Loeffler Warnock attacks here, as the Perdue Ossoff stuff is far less salacious for reasons that should be fairly obvious. Ossoff is a dead center Democrat, though this of course hasn't stopped the Perdue campaign and their weirdo Republican PACs from calling him a socialist. Because Warnock is somewhat progressive by American standards, though he doesn't currently support Medicare for all, which would be a deal breaker in a sane world, especially during this pandemic, and a black preacher, the nasty Red Scare bullshit is turned up to 11, complete with disturbing racial undertones. Here's one of Loeffler's ads with a little bit of everything. Jingoistic imagery, appeals to fear, red baiting, evocation of Black Lives Matter, and pro-cop, pro-authority nonsense.
This is America. But will it still be if the radical left controls the Senate? Raphael Warnock called police thugs and gangsters, hosted a rally for communist dictator Fidel Castro, and praised Marxism in speeches and writings. Raphael Warnock will give the radicals total control. Saving the Senate is about saving America from that.
I'm Kelly Loeffler. I approve this message.
Okay, so that was a lot of lying and misrepresentation crammed into one short ad. Let's focus on the red baiting first. Now, Warnock has apparently referred to Fidel Castro's legacy as complex in the past, a characterization I would think few could effectively argue against. No matter how many bad things one can say about Castro, the fact that Cuba has universal health care and effectively eliminated homelessness under his watch is at least one check in the positive column, in my humble opinion. This is a much bigger topic that requires a mountain of nuance that we don't really have time for here, but Americans really need to understand that almost all information we get from the mainstream on socialists, communists, and even social democrats and labor politics in general is filtered through an anti-leftist, pro-capitalist lens. The fantastic YouTube channels Bad Empanada, Vicky1999, and the economist Richard Wolff's Democracy at Work have some great deep dives on this topic, which I highly recommend, but the bottom line is that socialist and communist governments have accomplished some remarkable things in the face of militaristic and economic hostility from the capitalist West, and many of the misdeeds we ascribe to them can seem far less black and white when examined in context. Of course, none of that nuance matters in a political campaign, and most importantly, the accusations that Warnock is somehow sympathetic to Castro or any other socialists are almost completely unfounded. If he does look at leftist political leaders and ideas like an adult with a functioning brain, as opposed to a capitalism-worshipping fanatic like many Americans, he certainly hasn't made that part of his campaign, and he always says, "I believe in the American free enterprise system," when asked about these weak associations. The claim that he invited Castro to speak at his church is just a lie. The footage from that ad is from 1995, when Castro spoke at Abyssinian Church in New York. Warnock was a youth pastor at Abyssinian at the time, but he's nowhere to be found in the video footage, and there's no indication that he had anything to do with Castro's presence there. According to PolitiFact, Loeffler's campaign referred PolitiFact to a press release that recounted the New York event and repeated the attack, but did not offer evidence for her claim that Warnock celebrated or welcomed Castro. Warnock campaign spokesman Terrence Clark told PolitiFact that Warnock doesn't agree with the dictator's beliefs and actions. He also wasn't making decisions about who spoke at the church when he was a youth pastor there. The ad displays the vague phrase "repeatedly praised Marxism," citing respected source of real news Breitbart. That's a far right-wing rag if you don't know. I found a couple of articles on this from actual news sources, but I don't even need to cite them to demonstrate how bogus this claim is. I can just use the Loeffler campaign's own website. There's a whole section called Marxist Raphael, and it's hella weak. Here, I'll scroll it on the screen right now and try to give anyone who wants to read it time to pause. And I really want to emphasize that this stuff is from Loeffler's own campaign website, so it's presumably the most direct and extreme illustrations of the claim they're making that they could find, right? I'll just break down the little synopsis from the top of the page for now, but again, I encourage you to look at the details on the rest of this page if you have any misgivings about my framing, commentary, and/or conclusions here. Claim. Raphael Warnock's writings, teachings, and records all reveal his outward, unabashed support for Marxism and socialism. That's a pretty unequivocal statement. Let's see what they say to back it up. Warnock stated that the Marxist critique has much to teach the black church. Well, saying that an economist and philosopher's approach to analyzing history and critiquing society has much to teach is hardly a wholehearted endorsement of that approach. For instance, despite being an atheist, I think pretty much all religions have much to teach. Also, I want to abolish capitalism, but I have no doubt that there are things that capitalists or capitalism itself can teach us about how best to provide for everyone. This is just a childishly stupid attack. The red text hyperlinks to the relevant portion of Warnock's 2013 book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church, Theology, Piety, and Public Witness. I'm tempted to read the whole quotation in context here, but I'll just link it in the description and maybe read the quote on my podcast, Breadsheet, which you should definitely subscribe to and whatnot. In any case, this is a nothing accusation to begin with, even when framed by the Loeffler campaign themselves. The next piece of evidence they give for Warnock's supposed leftist leanings is that he criticized another author for trivializing black struggle against the obduracy of white capitalist forces. The other author Warnock criticized was Gary Marx, a scholar who operates from within the theoretical framework of his famous namesake, in Warnock's words. In the same brief section cited before, Warnock asserts that Gary Marx fallaciously concludes that there is an inverse relationship between the depth of pietistic faith and the intensity of civil rights militancy among African Americans. Furthermore, Warnock writes that Gary Marx's analysis is flawed by a paternalistic bias with respect to faith, culture, and experience that trivializes black struggle against the obduracy of white capitalistic forces and lumps all forms of black denominational and sectarian identity together in an undifferentiated way that hardly makes it possible for those who are its subjects to see themselves in the discussion. This is actually the context of the first point. Warnock follows up his initial criticism of Gary Marx by essentially saying, sure, Marxist theory has been an important part of modern black Christian history for what should be obvious reasons, and it's still useful, but I disagree with the Marxist framework as applied here. That's hardly outward, unabashed support for Marxism and socialism. Thinking adults should at least be able to understand the difference. I mean, brain havers would ideally be able to understand that the pursuit of a classless, stateless society is actually good, but there's little room for brain having in the midst of an election. The next point the Loeffler campaign offers about Warnock is that he claimed the white church was complicit in white supremacy and slavery. I mean, this is just true. I'd be interested in seeing anyone try and argue otherwise. Next point. Warnock said the black middle class should pay more attention to the hard questions about the distribution of wealth. Are there not any hard questions about the distribution of wealth? Why is this bad, whether you're a capitalist or socialist or whatever? Because it uses some of the same words a leftist might use? Don't pay attention to hard questions, I guess. Next point. But it gets even worse. Raphael Warnock's self-described mentor was Dr. James Cone, a Marxist with a history of making racially charged radical statements. Cone defended Marxism and called for a total reconstruction of society along the lines of democratic socialism. Warnock later said that Cone spoke with the power and moral authority of a prophet, and even delivered the eulogy at Cone's funeral in 2018. Warnock's association with this Cone fellow makes up a large portion of this page, along with lots of details about Cone's apparent beliefs. This guilt by association tactic calls to mind the aforementioned Obama Reverend Right media narrative, but they introduce Cone with a pretty milquetoast quote. I have to think that along the lines of democratic socialism isn't a terribly scary phrase to most Americans, but that sadly probably isn't the case for too many Georgians, I would imagine. The truly incendiary stuff rounds off the intro. Warnock's dissertation, The Mission of the Black Church, that Cone advised, later became the basis for Warnock's 2014 book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church. Side note, they say it's 2014 book. Everything else I found said it's 2013 book, but, small detail, I think it's their mistake. Back to the quote. In that book alone, Warnock cited over 34 works by Cone, even stating that Cone believed the white church was the Antichrist. Okay, credit where it's due. This one is actually pretty good. By that I mean that Cone's influence on Warnock is clearly established. Cone apparently did actually assert that the white Christian church is the enemy of Christ. Warnock cites this assertion uncritically in his book, and it's surely a thoroughly terrifying phrase to many, if not most, white Christians. However, this is still just second-degree guilt, and the context of the relevant excerpt from Warnock's book is far more nuanced than Loeffler's campaign suggests. The other weird point this ad makes is that Warnock compared police officers to gangsters and thugs. Do I need to show this clip in context? I will, because it's only a few seconds long, but do Republicans really think this is an extreme thing to say?
Showing up in a kind of gangster and thug mentality. You can wear all kinds of colors and be a thug. You can sometimes wear the colors of the state and behave like a thug.
I seem to recall several videos of police brutality, abuse, and murder, mostly of black men, surfacing this year, as they have increasingly every year since the advent of camera phones. I also recall these videos sparking a mass movement of protests that spread all over the United States and then many other parts of the world. I attended a few of these protests in Georgia myself, not just in the city of Atlanta, where black people make up more than half the local population, but also in predominantly white suburban areas. This is obviously anecdotal, but one protest I went to in Gwinnett County, a large suburb of Atlanta, appeared to have mostly white Georgians in attendance. Sure, Georgia has a lot of conservative white people who don't have to worry about being murdered by cops, but who do you know who actually likes the cops enough to think that Warnock is out of line for calling them gangsters and thugs? Plus, and again, this is anecdotal, I've personally witnessed a lot of centrist liberals and even a few moderate Republicans come around to the urgent travesty of state violence against people of color this year. Especially once they move past the propaganda against it, a lot of Americans and Georgians just support the Black Lives Matter movement.
You like wearing a hat, right, Fancy?
For some reason, Warnock has been avoiding the issue of police violence against people of color in his ads, but Jon Ossoff's ads have brought it up pretty regularly. Bit of a related side note, there's this long Ossoff ad I've seen a couple of times in which he engages in some real talk about his white guilt. I don't mean that in a negative way. I think a white guy running for office, especially in this political moment, should be expected to acknowledge his privilege and speak directly about the fact that people of color are terrorized by state-funded, state-sanctioned gangsters and thugs daily, ideally offering some solutions and engaging in some action to change that reality. But the funny thing about that Ossoff ad is that it's not a video. It's a voiceover with captions over a deliberately lit image of his face looking conspicuously older than he normally does. I have to think that's a focus group thing because Ossoff is and looks pretty young. Probably doesn't sit well with some voters.
This is Jon Ossoff, and I want to be really, really real with you right now.
Alrighty, the outline for this video is getting really, really long. I'll just sum up by saying that the other three big attacks I've been seeing against Warnock are also dumb. Those would be,
Warnock said, quote,
politicians are also gangsters and thugs.
Close quote.
They are. Next point. The no one can serve God in the military quotation. Warnock addressed this during the debate.
I was preaching that day from a very familiar Matthew text that says you can't serve God and mammon. It was a sermon about a moral foundation for everything that we do, and that when you have everything in order, that actually makes you a better soldier. It also makes you a better senator. And had Kelly Loeffler listened to the sermon, rather than trying to make a cheap political point, she would not have used her advantage as a U.S. senator to make millions on a pandemic while playing it down to the people she was supposed to be representing.
I happen to agree with the sentiment on its face. If God is supposed to be decent people, and we're presumably talking about the Christian God, whose son preached peace and pacifism, then yeah, it takes some cognitive dissonance to support the American imperial military machine and claim to give a shit about anything Jesus ever said. Of course, Warnock has a much cleaner and better defense of this statement. He was literally just quoting the Bible during one of his sermons. That works better than my take and makes it pretty obvious that no one should hire me as a campaign advisor, as if that point needed to be made. There are a couple of out-of-context clips of Reverend Warnock quoting Jeremiah Wright during or around the 2008 Obama campaign. Again, Wright, who had some associations with Obama, said "Goddamn America" during a sermon about American foreign policy, and a handful of adults were willing to entertain the reality of what Wright was getting at. I may still be in the minority on this, but if you don't understand the horror the American empire has brought upon the rest of the world for close to a century and a half, grow up and read a book. A real one, by Chris Hedges. Even if the claims about Warnock's leftist, socialist bona fides, I recently heard Brianna Joy Gray say on the Bad Faith podcast that she prefers to pronounce it bona fides, though her co-host Virgil Texas said bona fides would be the proper Latin pronunciation. Seems like either is fine, but I go with bona fides because it's more fun to say. Anyway, even if the claims about Warnock's leftist leanings are true, I obviously don't even think it would be a bad thing. I am a leftist after all, but the claims are based on next to nothing. He is decidedly to the right of Martin Luther King Jr. And isn't everyone supposed to like him these days? If you're in Georgia, please vote for Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock on January 5th. In any case, please share this video. I know I'm a little late on this, but people need to be disabused of this fear-mongering nonsense. With a Democratic majority in the Senate, there's maybe some chance that the federal government might actually do stuff over the next couple years. Thanks for tuning into this video. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Twitch at Haas_Bossman. And if you really like this video, consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/Haas_Bossman. And check out my podcast, Breadsheet, available everywhere pods are casted. More links in the description. Most importantly, again, please share this video to help push back against the baseless and childish attacks on Reverend Warnock. Thanks much, and I'll see you next time for a little crash course on the mammoth problem of money in U.S. politics. Love ya, and may the quantum fabric of space-time hold you forever in its cold, icy embrace. Mwah.